Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Kisus.
Shalom.
If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming episode, please contact the shul. All right, here we go. All right, before we dive in to this week's One Pasuk, I have a question for you guys.
A before question.
A before question. It's the beginning of the summer. Kids are getting ready to go off to camp. Parents have some more free time. What do you guys recommend for summer reading? What books?
Summer reading. Actually, I finished this past winter a fantastic read. Daniel Gordis's biography on Menachem Begin. I would recommend that to anyone and everyone. There's a lot of extraordinarily inspiring stories that are conveyed very beautifully, but it's not just a fascinating read. You walk out with a strong sense of pride to be Jewish, and that's something that he conveys really, really powerfully throughout the book. It's not just a strong connection to Israel that you'll walk out with, but also somebody who was a valiant fighter for Judaism, not just for Israel, for Judaism, and you feel really good after you read that book.
Nice.
Similar genre. I'm in the middle of The Genius of Israel. That's by Dan Senor and Saul Singer. Dan Senor and Saul, I think, both together wrote Startup Nation. Dan Senor has a podcast, Call Me Back, which I'm a very big promoter of, and it's a good read. It's a good book. Full disclosure, I listen to audiobooks because I don't want to get the credit for reading if I'm listening to it. But it's a good read, and it's actually narrated the audiobook by Dan Senor, which is always great when the author is the narrator, and it's just chock full of great analysis about the social health and well-being of the state of Israel.
I would think, at least from my perspective, that listening to an audiobook is harder than reading a book.
No,
some people have a hard time just concentrating through that whole thing.
If I had one superpower, I would want to be able to read quickly, retain the information, and not fall asleep. Just for 2 hours a day. If I could just get that in, that would be a game changer. For me, reading a book is tedious and slow, and I'm instantaneously asleep.
When I'm reading, I actually don't like to read before bed because I'm stimulated by the book, and I think and analyze, and I'm also a slow reader for that reason, because I don't just read just to get through it. I'm thinking, hey, would I have written that the same way? Do I agree? What is he trying to say? So I'm not necessarily fast reader, so I don't have that part of the superpower, but I'm not falling asleep.
When I read before bed, I keep rereading the same sentence 6 times because I realize that I got to the end of the sentence, but my brain's already off, and I try again, and then I'm slunk down, and then I've made three paragraphs of progress, and I'm sleeping.
That happens to me too, but for me, reading a book, first of all, a book locks you in. It locks in your focus, and if I'm reading a book before I go to bed, then I know I have 10 minutes or less, and
the clock starts.
It's a quality, right? It's a quality read, and it calms the mind because it's a meditative practice, right? You're now focused on something. You're not thinking about the things you didn't get to that day and the things that are coming up tomorrow. So it focuses you, and then I'll notice that I'll reach a point in which the words are coming slower, and I know I am ready.
Right.
And I am out.
Rabbi, what's your recommendation? We didn't hear you.
What I'm really into right now, someone who I've read before, but I'm coming back to, is Jonathan Haidt. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, a researcher, professor at NYU, and a best-selling author. And he's been writing for many years, among other things, about the impact of technology on our society and our kids. And so he has a new book out, The Anxious Generation, which I picked up, and then I realized I really needed to go back and read The Coddling of the American Mind, which he wrote a few years back to set the stage for the anxious generation. So I'm almost done with The Coddling of the American Mind, which is such an important book. And then I'm going to move on to The Anxious Generation, and maybe a little bit of a teaser. I think my Shabbos Shuvah Drasha is going to draw from The Anxious Generation and some of the lessons that we need to learn. Okay, let's turn to our pasuk for this week, Parshas Korach. The pasuk comes from Korach's central complaint, rebellion against Moshe and Aaron, chapter 16, verse 3, Perek Tezayin, pasuk Gimel, Vayikahalu al Moshe v'al Haron vayomer alehem. They, Korach, and all the people that he gathered together, they gathered against Moshe and Aaron, and they said to them, Rav lachem, ki chol hayda kulam kedoshim uvesocham Hashem. Rav lachem, you have gone too far. You have taken too much. For all the community are holy, all of them, and Hashem is in their midst. Umadua tisnasu al ka'al Hashem. Why then do you raise yourselves above Hashem's congregation? These words are very terse, and it's not so simple to pick out exactly what he's rebelling against. So let's see. What do we make of these fighting words of Korach?
One of the things I love about this project is that it obligates me to really sit with a pasuk and think about it in a way that I don't typically have to do, let's say, or have time to do or prioritize doing. And sitting with this pasuk, something dawned on me. The simple complaint here is that Moshe and Aaron and their immediate family is kind of monopolizing the leadership of the Jewish people. And if we just take their words at face value, it's, we're all holy, we don't need you to, why do you get all the leadership? We don't need your leadership, basically. And what dawned on me was that this is really the opposite and inverse parallel complaint, or let's call it a sin, from that of the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. Because what happened? Moshe went up, the Jewish people miscalculated, and the pasuk says, "Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe laredes." They saw that Moshe was delayed in coming down, and they get nervous, and they come to Aaron and they say, "We need someone to replace Moshe. The Moshe who took us he'elanu me'eretz Mitzrayim lo yadanu mehayalo. We don't know what happened to Moshe. He's the one who took us out of Egypt." Now, and they're in a panic because at that point they're so dependent on Moshe, so vulnerable. Their relationship to God is so mediated and reliant on Moshe that without Moshe, there's just panic and there's fear. There's total vulnerability. And here, now we're jumping ahead, and we actually have the parallel opposite, where now the Jewish people are coming to Moshe, or at least a segment, and they're saying, we don't need you, Moshe. We're all holy. The whole nation is holy. We don't need a Moshe. We don't need an Aaron. So these are kind of two polar opposites. And in fact, the language of the pasuk, in both cases, it's vayikahel or vayikahalu al. So the language of the psukim are the same. They gather up upon Aaron or upon Moshe and Aaron. So I think it draws a little bit of a line between the two of them. And I think that when you put this all together, what you get is this kind of like two extremes that are both unhealthy. One is extreme dependence on religious leadership, where you feel like I have no relationship to God if it's not mediated by someone. And then a feeling of extreme independence, where we don't need a rabbi, we don't need a leader, we don't need anything, because we're all educated, we all can learn, we all have our own relationship with Hashem, and obviously the right balance is in between those two. But seeing those two as kind of like the bookends of two different mentalities and kind of opposite chataim was like very illuminating. It was like a little bit of a revelation for me.
So that's why you have together a Seilecha Rav, Uknei Lecha Chaver. You could say a Seilecha Rav. Once you have a Rav, you don't need anything else. But no, you need a Chaver also. You need somebody on your level. So I think that's beautiful. But I'm curious to hear. Do you think Korach was sincere in this argument?
So that's a really good question. I think this is one of those political slogan that captures a lot of different people with it's a Rorschach test where everyone sees in this line, the brilliance of Korach here is that he throws out a line that unifies a broad coalition of people. Each one with their right Dasan and Aviram is different than Korach, is different than the 250 other Nisiyei Haida. Each one has their own complaint, and the Parsha actually, you can unspool it and see how each one gets addressed differently. But he has this great one-liner, like, we're all holy. Like, how could you argue with we're all holy, right? It's kind of like the party names in Israel, right? Every party name is like blue and white, the future, moving forward, right? It's all like, all the party names are things that, like, no one's gonna, you can't argue with it. Right?
Yeah.
It's just like
Kulam Kedoshim is the first bumper sticker.
Right, Kulam Kedoshim. And so everyone in their own lane, with their own grievances, can tie into that. But it's a catch-all. There's no real sincerity there.
I think you can describe Korach as the very first political strategist. He knows how to manipulate people, manipulate language and slogans in order to rally people together. He's the first political strategist.
There you have it. You heard that here first.
Yeah, it's a brilliant, I guess, kind kind of
Method.
Yeah, it's a brilliant method and kind of ingenious. What's the word I'm looking for?
Mr. Burns.
Yeah, Mr. Burns. I'm not sure I was going for Mr. Burns, but
Well,
I was,
you were doing
I was steepling my fingers to the rabbi.
But you were tapping your fingers like
yeah.
Mr. Burns does.
Rabbi Kassus, there's a show called The Simpsons, and in it there's a villain by the name of Mr. Burns.
I don't have enough time to read. You think I'm going to start watching The Simpsons? All right. I came across a fascinating idea from Rav Shimshon Pincus. And he points out that the book of Bereshit, there were a number of instances where jealousy was the primary driver of catastrophe. And since Bereshit, we haven't seen a single incident that really discusses jealousy until we get to the story of Korach. And what he points out so fascinatingly is that, if anything, there should have been an increase, because we begin to create hierarchy amongst the Jewish people. There are Kohanim, Levi'im, there are Yisraelim, there are different roles, there are different jobs. If anything, you should see a proliferation of jealousy, of frustration, of people saying, hey, why is he there or she there? Why can't I be there as well? But yet, Bnei Yisrael, to the remarkable credit of Bnei Yisrael, they have never, ever tried to cross this path again. They've understood the dangers of jealousy, and they've stayed far away from it. Comes Korach and says, I'm going to reintroduce this to the Jewish people. And the way he describes the process of him trying to work over these people to convince them that they're missing something is so evil, how he takes people out of a certain contentness, a certain understanding of this is my role and I'm happy doing it, to suddenly thinking there's a power grab here, I should be somewhere else, I can attain that if I would only insert myself. But really our job in life as a nation with so many different components and aspects is to recognize that we each have a unique role. He says nobody wakes up in the morning thinking like, how is it right that bird is flying outside my window? Why don't I have wings? I should have wings. But nobody thinks like that. Why? Because we know we're human. That's not our role. Our role is not to fly. Our role is not to hop. Our role is to be human beings. And therefore, if we prioritize in our own mind this sense of responsibility that we have, that we each have individual roles. We just read a couple of weeks ago, Parashat Naso. We talk about Berkat Kohanim. Now, here you have, take the Sephardic minyan, let's say we have between 7 and 15 Kohanim on a given Shabbat. 200 non-Kohanim. Like, how does this make sense? They're the ones blessing us. What about me? What am I, chopped liver? But no, we understand that our job is to receive the beracha. Their job is to give the beracha. And we're all one unit. We each have our own unique role. But ultimately, what Korach was the line he was trying to blur here so that everybody could sort of buy in, is that there's opportunity. And if there's opportunity, we should get involved. But really, the way to stay away from a mahloket of this nature is to take a step back and understand, you know what? This is as foreign to me as wings. And if I have no part of this, because I happen not to be a Levi, I happen not to be a Kohen, I'm a Yisrael, but I will be the best Yisrael that I possibly could be. In that instance, we can easily extract ourselves from a potential machloket of Korach's caliber.
It's very nice. It kind of jives with the fairly well-known Ibn Ezra on Losach mode, not to covet your friend's things and life and belongings. The million-dollar question is, how do you control that? That's a feeling, and okay, you may not violate it until you act on it, but in any event, how do you kind of control that feeling? And so the Ibn Ezra says it's kind of like when a princess is riding through a town and a pauper, sees the princess, so that pauper doesn't look and think to himself, wow, I'd like to marry that princess, because it's so beyond the realm of possibility that when you say that's someone in totally different arena than I am. So it's not even, they don't start thinking, who do I know who can maybe suggest the shidduch? And so that's how you're supposed to look at everyone else's possessions. It's totally not shaykh to me in any way.
He actually, beautiful. He actually quotes that. I was thinking of inserting it, but I was afraid I wouldn't be able to.
Look at that.
I wouldn't be able to develop it as beautifully as you just did in such a succinct manner with us being conscientious of time. So the fact that you did that so precisely and clearly, much appreciated. Actually, I heard over from a good friend of mine, Rabbi Moshe Malka. We also in Nassau we read about the Nisi'im, and one of the Nisi'im, his name is Ahira ben Enan. And the Or HaChaim HaKadosh writes that the reason why his name was Ahira was because he had the attitude of what my brother has is bad for me. Ahira, whatever he has is bad for me. What I have is good for me. Specifically, that tribe was surrounded by, on one side, the sea, and the Zevulun has all this commerce because they have access to the sea and all the imports. And they were on hilly land, and then they saw flat land above them. And they said, look, they can plant, they could farm. We can't do anything with our hilly land. But yet, Their attitude was, ahira, whatever my brother has is not for me. And that allows me to take a step back and say, no, I have no part of this. It's not something I can even invest in or I can even think to take part of because it's not relevant to me at all.
The Sfas Emes has a fascinating question and analysis on this pasuk on Korach.
I love that you have like a mini pocket-sized Sfas Emes. That usually means this is with you.
The purchase of a mini Sfas Emes was, to quote Rabbi Goldberg, aspirational. I like glancing at it, and I like sticking it in my talis bag and just like having it there in case my mind goes there. So yeah. Anyways, so he looks at the Mishnah in Perkei Avos, which says that kol machlokes shehi l'shem shamayim, that any dispute that is for the sake of heaven, sofa liskayim, it will endure. V'she'ein l'shem shamayim, but if it's not for the sake of heaven, it won't endure. And it gives examples. A machlokas l'shem shamayim for the sake of heaven is that of Hillel and Shammai, the rabbinic disputes. And v'she'ein l'shem shamayim, not l'shem shamayim, that's machlokas Korach v'chol hadaso, the dispute raised by Korach and his people. And the Sfas Emes essentially asks the question, it's true that Korach's machlokas wasn't l'shem shamayim, but that wasn't his central flaw. He was punished not because his machlokas wasn't l'shem shamayim, he was punished because he rebelled against Hashem's chosen leaders. Imagine had he rebelled against Moshe and Aaron and Hashem's choice, but did it l'shem shamayim. Would it be different? Who knows, but that doesn't seem to be the worst part of it. And so the Sfas Emes answers, he explains this Mishnah as follows, very beautifully. He says that, of course, machlokas, dispute, critique, is such a critical ingredient for human progress. And it's found everywhere. We have disputes every day. And even in serving Hashem and studying Torah, disputes, machlokas, is all over the place. And we retain it, and we embrace it. We celebrate machlokas. But what distinguishes machlokas l'shem shamayim is that machlokas is the type of endeavor that lends itself to arrogance and self-assurance. That when we're advocating for our opinion, it's very easy to believe in our opinion so much that we have no concept of the other. And what the Sfas Emes says is that a machlokas l'shem shamayim is a machlokas grounded in humility, the recognition that, yes, I have an opinion, but I'm subservient to Hashem, I have to treat people a certain way, and that's the model for productive machlokas, whether in Torah, in Jewish life, or anywhere. And what Korach failed at so critically, his central flaw, is that his machlokas lacked humility. And because it lacked humility, that's why it was considered a rebellion against Hashem. Because even if he sincerely believed that this was a good idea, nevertheless, because he didn't approach it with humility, that ultimately it's Hashem's decision. And you see it, I believe, in the language when it says, Umadua tisnaseu al kahal Hashem. The fact that Korach could only see this issue through the lens of what puts you at the top, that leadership is clearly something that is lording over people. He was looking at it through his own lens of arrogance and self-assurance. And I think it's such an important lesson today. We live in a world that is polarized, and we live in a world in which people not only hold strong to their beliefs, but we're exposed to the kinds of technology like algorithms which only reinforce our own beliefs. Literally, it's the algorithms of Korach, right? These algorithms don't breed the humility of knowing how to balance confidence in one's opinion with the humility to listen to others and to have yirah shamayim. And because the technology eliminates that humility and just exposes us to more and more information that reinforce our own held beliefs, it's mamish Korach v'adaso, what we're being exposed to and what our children are being exposed to. And that's the real challenge of our generation, to hold strong to our beliefs, to have our opinions, and to be able to inject our conversations with enough humility that we see the other person, we recognize their right to have an opinion, and that we dialogue with them, and we don't demonize them, and we see them as fellow human beings who perhaps just have a different approach. And if we have a sense of yirah shamayim, of fear of heaven, that enables us to engage in machlokas, in dialogue, which is so critical to human progress, in a way that's l'shem shamayim. Thank you for joining us for another installment of the One Pasuk podcast. As always, please share your feedback, and if you'd like to sponsor an episode, please reach out to one of us. Have a great Shabbos.